Ladies and gentlemen, please now welcome to the stage Vice Chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Ambassador Boris Ruge.
Good afternoon. The Munich Security Conference is very proud to be part of NATO Engages. We've worked very hard with our partners, the names of which you can see behind me, to make this event happen. We're delighted to have you here, great speakers and a great audience. Professor Schellenhuber just gave us a sobering presentation, not unlike the one he gave at the Munich Security Conference 10 months ago. And we at the Munich Security Conference believe very strongly that climate change must be addressed as a security issue. And that is why we're pleased to have it on the agenda today. And we're very fortunate to have with us Prime Minister Erna Solberg of Norway. And I would like all of you to welcome the Prime Minister. Thank you for being with us, Prime Minister. It's a real privilege to have you. You've been Prime Minister since 2013, and climate issues and issues of sustainability have been important topics for you. So it's great to have you here. Before we turn to climate, I would like to ask you very briefly, what is it that you're looking for from the leaders' meeting tomorrow?
Well, first of all, I think we are here to celebrate 70 years of cooperation over the Atlantic for security, for peace, and I suppose that our biggest aim was to have to remember that through the meeting, that we have had 70 years of securing this, and that even if we have discussions up and down on single issues, there still is a very fundamental, I think, trust that we can deliver on security for all member countries, and I think that's the most important thing that we've been working on the last 6 years, in fact, in this alliance.
Thank you. Now, turning to climate, you and I were listening to the professor's presentation just now. And as somebody who has thought about these issues and engaged on them in many different fora, I'd like to ask you for your reaction to what the professor had to tell us.
Well, I think this is among the issues that we have to start to discuss closer on security issues too. What will climate change, the heating of the world, mean for insecurity, for different changes, what new types of challenges? And some of them are not new. I mean, we now have a critical discussion in a critical situation in Mali, Burkina Faso. We have had extremism rising, but also some of this is fueled by lack of water, and that you get the herders to move into the areas where the farmers are, and then you'll end up in a conflict because the movement of people, climate change makes people move, and it changes and it creates new security threats in areas. It will change economies, and I think that is also a big aspect of it, and it will change sea routes and all of this that is also implicated by the Arctic. Just before this weekend, there was a news story in Norway saying that the temperature is on average since 1961, that's the year I was born, so through my lifetime, has increased by 0.9 degrees. In Oslo, it has increased by 2 degrees. In the Arctic, by 5.6 degrees. It's twice as fast than the mainland, and even more faster than the average, the changes that we're seeing. And that will change the structures. And what we have to do is to see what will be the security implications of those changed structures.
So when we think of climate change in NATO, it's something that perhaps people usually don't think of as connected. How would you see NATO's role? It's primarily, in a sense, a matter of adaptation. How do we deal with the fallout of climate change? You talked about the southern neighborhood of NATO, migration, and the impact that can have on our security. You also mentioned the Arctic, and perhaps we can explore that a little more. But is NATO's role to deal with the fallout?
I think NATO's role is to make sure that they analyze the root causes for changes in security in different areas. I mentioned Mali, Iraq is also a very difficult issue when it comes to water supply. The whole Middle East has a water problem for the future, and it will lead to more conflicts in these areas. And that's understanding what happens means that you learn more about security. I don't think we will solve this by our defense part of NATO. But on the political part, it might also give rise to a little bit more of discussion on how important is it to stop the change, because that's what we really have to do, is to stop the climate change, is to make sure that we invest now instead of having to really invest a lot in the future to work on the damages. It's much less costly to prevent climate change than it will be to adapt to it, and on all levels of our society. So I think it's for the political side more than for the military side of it. But of course, it has to be part of the analysis that you see where the new threats are and what will happen because of that.
My sense, and I could be wrong, is that one thing that NATO can bring to this is precisely the analytical side, the assessment side. I think at the beginning of this year, the US Department of Defense issued a study on the impact of climate change on US military installations and the operational impact that has. So my sense is that if military people write these things up with the credibility they have and say there's real life consequences of this, it's not just an environmental issue. It's not just something that tree huggers care about. We as military people see an impact. It undermines our security. Do you think that political leaders, heads of state and government, ministers will take note if that analysis comes out of the NATO system?
Yes, and understanding that insecurity is the worst thing for security. I mean, when things change too much, it's difficult to plan. It's difficult to know how to deal with it. It's you have to rethink a lot of the strategies that you have. And climate change is the big insecurity creator these days, because it will and when you have more people, I mean, in Africa, migration is the big issue for Europe. Underlying this, climate change will lead to more migration. It will lead to more conflicts. It will lead to less sustainable development in all of the African continent, even though, on the soft power side, the European Union is trying to work together with other countries to create more development in these countries to stop the migration waves. So I think understanding this and see how that fuels extremism. Because one thing is, of course, that there will be a hotspot and conflict between countries, but it fuels extremism, and extremism is global. It's not local anymore. It will have global effects.
Now, the Arctic is an area of particular interest to Norway. Can you talk a little bit about how climate change has already impacted and what that means for Norwegian security?
Well, what we see in the Arctic, of course, is that the ice cap is moving further north. It means that you will have the sea routes opened in the north that will be open because it's ice-free, but not open security-wise. I mean, if you're going from Europe to China by the North Passage, I mean, you go by Russia all the way, and it still is costly. It's going to be difficult to have insurance on your trade, so we don't really see that much happening. We discuss it more than what really is happening these days because of costs on that. What we do see is that it increases economic activity in those areas. It increases fisheries, tourism. So we don't really look upon the challenges in the Arctic at these days as new security issues. The new things are, in fact, safety issues. It's about rescue. It's about safety. It's about making sure that you can search and rescue people who are there. I mean, a big cruise ship having problems in the Arctic area is going to be a very challenging thing. So we have to think through all of these things. But the Arctic has always been an area for Russian operations. They have been testing their military equipment there all the time. It's not a new thing, the military activity. The new thing is that the civil activity is increasing in these areas and leads to those of us who are countries who have responsibility in those areas, who have economic zones. We have to plan more for what we are doing and probably have to regulate more what we are doing in these areas.
Earlier in the day, we had Secretary General Stoltenberg here, fellow Norwegian, and he spoke about the Arctic as well, and he said China was also active in the Arctic. And perhaps we can turn to China for just 1 second, because it appears that China will be part of the discussion among leaders tomorrow. And China is seen as the great power competitor, the rising power, extending its influence beyond Asia in a number of ways. So it's a competitor on the one hand, but when we look to the issue of climate change, it's obvious that we will not get a handle on climate change unless we find some way of bringing China on board, cooperating with China, using the Chinese potential for innovation. Can you describe how you see China if you look at it from this meeting and also with regard to climate change?
Well, in the view of climate change, we will not solve the issues without having the big emitters on board. I said that in Madrid when the COP opened yesterday. We need to have the big emitters on board, and they need to have stronger national targets the next year. They have to do that, and China is one of them. The US is one of them, which we would hope for getting back into the climate discussions again. But all of the big emitters have to participate in that, because they're still opening new coal mines to fuel the energy need of China. So we can do a lot in other countries, but if not China is not on board, it will be difficult. And I believe that the Chinese are thinking seriously about this. One of the reasons is, of course, because of the congestions in their and the air pollution in their own cities. It's harming the health of Chinese people. So there's a mixture of reasons, but I think they're on board with this. When it comes to the economic activity of China, of course, they are innovative. They are, all our businesses are working closely with them on different issues. It's a big market, but it's also a big technology developer these days. And I think there is a need to drag China into this international organization, to the multilateral organization, and work together with them, both on climate change, but also on all of the other issues that leads to lowering tensions in the world. When it comes to the Arctic, I think what we mainly see now from our side is that the Chinese, in their research work, on research and polar research, is very interested in the Arctic. And it's important to remember that the Earth's orbit is the shortest on the poles. That means that if you're looking at what happens in space and satellites, this is also an important issue for a lot of countries to be active in that area. And of course, they are on oil and gas.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Now we have a short 7 minutes left, and I want to bring in the audience. And specifically, I'd like to discriminate against all who are older than 35 years. So if we can have some under 35 sticking up their hands with questions. And do we have a mic somewhere? I'm looking. So we have one question right here. And I'd like to take 2 or 3 questions in a row.
I have 247.
No, that's right. Please.
Hello, my name is Richard Griesa. I'm from the University of Munich. And my question to the Prime Minister is what role Svalbard, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is going to play in the Arctic, and how Norway is going to act as possibly a broker or an actor in the struggle over the Arctic.
Thank you. 2 more questions, under 35s. There's one over there.
My name's Connor, and I'm a student at the University of Glasgow. We're seeing a rising movement of young people about climate change, but the political leaders don't seem to be reflecting the urgent need to act on it. Do we need to see our political leaders take action and kind of bring some uncomfortable truths and uncomfortable laws to society to make us change, because at the moment we don't seem to be doing it by choice and through our actions. So that's my question.
And we have the young lady over here.
Hello, my name is Ekaterina and I'm part of the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria, our youth organization. So our organization and the seniors and the younger ones have been working on the Bulgarian presence on the Antarctic. And we will be happy to also cooperate with Norway on that issue. But for that reason, we will be happy also Norway to open its embassy in Sofia and not to be regional.
Will there be an embassy in Sofia, is your question? Okay, then I'd like one more question. Is there another young lady here? Pass on the mic. And if you could keep the questions to the point, please.
Okay, hello, I'm Sofia, I'm from NATO, Portugal. Being that Norway is a role model regarding a total defense system, how can you apply some measures to tackle or to respond to climate change challenges? Thank you.
Thank you. Prime Minister.
First of all, let me start by the Arctic. There is no battle over the Arctic. The Arctic is a well-regulated area. It's regulated by the law of the sea. And there is a UN commission that decides on where the economic zones go. So those who believe that this is a wilderness place where there's no law that applies, there are laws and there are caretakers, and 9 countries are the main caretakers in the Arctic Council. So it's important to say that this is not a free zone for people to do activity. It's on the national authority, and it's well. And Svalbard is part of the Norwegian of Norway. It has a special treaty around it, but it's a part of our country. And what we do there is that we try. First of all, most of this is vulnerable nature, so a lot of it is regulated because of the nature that's there. But we are working a lot on cooperation when it comes to research. There is a large international community of researchers there. And of course, there is a bit of tourism, a little bit too much maybe, but we are now trying to look at how we can make sure that it doesn't become too much for the nature and the caretaking of the Arctic area. But there is a well-regulated system for all of this. The challenge is, of course, as I said, is on the safety issues, because when there are more tourists, more boats, it's difficult. You know, we have a small hospital, we have some transportation means, but we cannot rescue a whole cruise line up there if something really goes wrong. It's going to be quite difficult. If we are too comfortable, we as world leaders, I think that depends on who are the leaders that are facing climate change. I believe, and I sincerely believe that there is a big responsibility that most national leaders feel today. But there is also a problem between the short-sightedness in politics and the long sights. And it's difficult to get the compromise. And I was in a panel in Madrid yesterday talking about just transition. And that's the big and difficult issue, because there will be countries losing jobs. If you look at what has happened in riots the last 2, 3, 4 months in different parts of the world, it's one of the guidelines in the work against climate change that people are trying to follow up, is to cut petrol and oil subsidies in countries, and it leads to street riots. Maybe not only because of that, there's probably a lot of other reasons why the riots come, but it says that it's difficult to do that type of structural changes without really having a public support for it. That's why it's important to engage, it's important to discuss, it's important to get people to understand, and it's important for all of us politicians to understand that we can't just let a part of our society take the cost, for example, by losing their jobs or by getting much more costs because we are putting in policies that are hurting some parts of it. Even in my country, I have to admit, we have a discussion on, we have a very extensive electrical car policy. The ones who buy new cars and expensive new electrical cars are quite well off compared to those who would buy their first car, and it would be a 10-year-old car, and they will not get an electrical car by that. So it's sometimes the social distribution of connected to it is difficult. We try to be very good at working together with Bulgaria, even though we do not have an embassy there. Sometimes we have to run efficiently also our foreign services. And I think the total defense system is an important part of working also against, changes, and especially when we are adapting to the more challenging weather systems that you have, that we will get by with climate change. Our total defense system is an important part of it, because the civil defense systems have to be increased, I think, in most countries, because you get more flooding, avalanches, and all of that. And I think my time is up.
And our time is up, Prime Minister. Thank you very, very much for being here. We could go on for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.